This talks about Patricia McKillip and alchemy, and I love both Patricia McKillip and alchemy. I thought we'd start with a question. Put your hand up if you've heard of Patricia McKillip. Okay, most people. And put your hand up if you've read any of her work. And put your hand up if you knew her. Right. So she means a great deal to the people that encounter her work. Yeah. So it's quite an honour to give this. I'm not really going to be able to live up to doing her justice, because she's an incredible writer. Stephen Donaldson just said, Patricia McKillip, there's no greater writer than Patricia McKillip. And, sometimes the start of books are peppered with quotes from colleagues in the field. I think Ombre and Shadow just has that. Keep it simple and just say, there's no greater writer than Patricia McKillip. And for me, that's true. So we're going to explore what she's doing there, why it's so important now. I think it's got parallels with what you were saying, and also some of the things that Nalo and Marina Warner touched on. So, before we attempt our vivid and lyrical conjunction of alchemy and Patricia McKillip, let's first get to know each of them separately. Solve et coagula, as the alchemists say. And dissolve, bring them together. If we can, let's see what happens. So, you have to do this thing where you kind of introduce the person, but it's impossible. All the awards she won, there are too many. It would take up a good 4 minutes to list all the awards. She won them all, and she holds the record for the most mythopoeic awards. It's an outrageous number, so it's almost comical. I think instead of doing that introductory thing, it's better to just hear her work. And to do that, we've got one of Patricia's close friends and colleagues, and for some of her work, editor, Terri Windling, to read a passage from Umbria and Shadow, and it's chapter 2, The Enchanted Heart.
Thank you, Ben. I think you're right that the main way to encounter Pat is through her extraordinary language. Mag was 7 when she discovered that she was human. Until then, she had only been what Faye called my waxling. That Faye could make a child out of wax to help her with this and that was scarcely in question. Mag knew nothing of life before Faye made her. And when Faye gave her memory and her quick, curious eyes that went everywhere in the ancient city of Umbria, became her greatest assets. Faye lived for those who knew how to find her within Umbria's past. Parts of the city's past lay within time's reach, beneath the streets, in great old limestone tunnels, the hovels and the mansions and sunken river that Umbria shrugged off like a forgotten skin and buried beneath itself through the centuries. Other parts were less accessible. Everyone knew of the past. They knew the smells of wild rose and shit and flying sausage and the direction of the wind and the cry of the gulls around the rotting docks. But though they relied on sausage and air, few paid attention to the city's past. That suited Faye, who lived among the borderline of past and present. Those who needed her followed the scent of her work and found her. Those who didn't considered her a vague seep out of someone's cistern, an imprecise shadow at the end of an alley, and walked their ceaseless, complex patterns above her head, never knowing how their lives echoed down the intricate passageway of time into the hollows beneath the city.
It's good, isn't it? When I first read that, I was just grinning with joy, and I felt a sense of relief that something like that actually exists. We're surrounded by pale, square language a lot of the time, and so you can armour yourself in things like that language, and wear it as a protective cloak as you move through the world. That's how I feel about it. So, in a 2010 interview with Intergalactic, Patricia McKillip said these words: "I was brought up very rigidly Catholic. As a Catholic, your mythological world has a wall around it, and Tolkien just tipped that wall right over. He demolished it. He made you feel like the imagination was something that you could keep on going through and go through and never find an end to." McKillip's work, especially her language, has that effect on me, as I'm sure it does for the people that raised their hand before. It dissolves the walls built around imagination, and it shows you how to cast a spell with words. Okay, so we're going to come back to McKillip shortly, but now to alchemy. What actually is alchemy? Put your hand up if you have a sense of what alchemy is about. Any, go on, Kathleen, you want to try alchemy?
He said a sense, divine.
A sense. It's a terrifying thing to try and describe. Most people's sense of it's about transmutations and transformations, and there's something about lead into gold. But one of the problems with it, it spanned so much time and so many different cultures that it's accrued and it created all these different ideas about what it actually is. So we're going to try and unpack some of those. It's one idea of what alchemy is. It's been called a proto-science. It's been called the hidden spiritual tradition of the West, a fool's errand for fool's gold, and a nexus of metaphors for the states, processes, and images of the soul. And I think that's the most interesting one. And the gold, the elixir, the philosopher's stone, those are just a few of the metaphors, but there are many more. They're not necessarily the most interesting ones. Because it's linked so much to Christianity, it got connected to this ascensionist thing. Oh, you've got to get somewhere, the gold's the best thing. But that's a monotheism infiltrating something much more polyphonic, prismatic consciousness of alchemy. Gets channeled into this spiritual ascensionist thing. So since alchemy is such a slippery, mercurial thing for our modern minds to grasp, let's take a few moments to distill this vaporous mass of ideas into a few clear drops. Alchemy is important for the following reasons. It treats rocks, minerals, and metals, and all of material nature as imbued with soul. And two, because of this, it has something to say about our present-day situation, which is hard to get your head around. The ecological crisis, and that word doesn't really contain what that means. It takes an effort to feel it. And if you make that effort, you open yourself up to all kinds of trouble. So I'm not going to do that now whilst I'm giving this talk. Maybe do it later. 3, an elaboration on that. So, is it possible to have an ecological crisis if we treat material nature as a living substance replete with soul, life, and mystery? And we used to have this, but the last 400, 500 years has eroded that. More than that, but I think that's intensified in the last few centuries. And this really is what I see, what I hope will join fantasists together and artists of the imagination. There's a bigger enemy, and it's the erosion of the soul of the world. And whatever your political disposition, I hope that fantasists can find common ground with that. And 3, why alchemy is important. Have some water. Alchemize my esophagus. Like myth, fairy tales, alchemy and dream as well, alchemy provides highly specific metaphors for the states, processes, and images of the soul. And because of this, it has the ability to dissolve the dry left hemisphere literalistic thinking and speaking that's come to dominate the culture. So last night, Narlo, I can't remember, my sense of time's getting dissolved. When did Narlo give her talk? Was that yesterday? Yes. She said, we need word magic. And this was in response to, I think, like a sort of political situation today. And the night before that, Marina Warner touched on how figurative language is fading from speech. Figurative language. So has language become disfigured? And who's doing the disfiguring? Alchemy restores figurative language, and it restores figures to speech. So that those figures, the images, animals, and peoples who are the underground denizens of the soul, are free to lend their magic to words. But none of this gives us an image of what the alchemists were actually doing. And since images are one of the primary currencies dealt with by artists of imagination, this talk would be anti-imaginal if it didn't provide some. Thankfully, Patricia McGilchrist herself is here to help us from beyond the grave. She died 10 weeks ago. Apologies if you did not know that. And you loved her work. This is from a story called Transmutation. And we're a few pages in, and we're standing inside the workshop of an old alchemist with his two assistants, Cerise and Aubrey. They were all silent then, watching fire touch the unknown substance. It flared black. Aubrey risked his red gold brows, rubbed his eyes. At his elbow, Cerise made the first note of analysis. Turns obscure under fire. Aubrey reached for a glass beaker, poured a bead of crimson into a solution of salts. It fell as gracefully as a falling world. Retains integrity in solution, Cerise wrote, and added, unlike the experimenter. So from that, you maybe get the sense of what the alchemists were doing, although it's still quite obscure. They were sort of cooking with salts and acids and ore of antimony and metallic alloys. And since the vast majority of alchemy took place before Descartes and the mind-matter split, all the materials that they're cooking with were brimming with spirit and life and imbued with imagination. You're cooking with imagination, and since you, the alchemist, are also part of the material life of the cosmos, you're also being cooked by imagination. And that's the crucial thing that's kind of a trick that you've got to get your modern mind to do, that you're a node, an outgrowth of the planet's life. It might sound far out, but to me it sounds like just a simple statement of fact. Coevolution. So the archetypal psychologist James Hillman, to whom this talk owes a debt, called alchemy the sensuous fantastic because it's full of green lions and salamanders and oils and jars and alembics and liquid metals and doves of Diana and dragons eating their own tail and pickled mandrakes and marvellous wild hermaphrodites. And I think that's part of what attracted Patricia McKillip to alchemy, is because you're cooking with the archetypal images of imagination. And in that same short story, Transmutations, when asked why she's studying alchemy, the character Cerise replies, I thought by immersing myself in the process, that perhaps I could transmute language. This relationship between alchemy and language is key. Because one idea of alchemy, which we've already touched on, is that it provides richly imaginative, highly differentiated metaphors for the states, processes, and images of the soul. That idea comes from Hillman, who also said, talking alchemically is a marvelous way to talk. It's all metaphor, and yet the language is all materialized. It's material language. And part of the reason why the language of alchemy is so visceral and tactile is because it's got its roots in ancient handwork, craftwork, like metallurgy and jewelry and cloth dyeing and balming and perfumery. These were deeply physical, aesthetic disciplines that involved smelting, dipping, preserving, tincturing, diluting, dissolving, and distilling. Soul-making in alchemy, Hillman says, requires corrosive acids, heavy earths, ascending birds. It's all metaphor. I know I'm not composed of salt or sulfur, or that I'm buried in horse dung, or putrefying, or turning white. These are metaphors. The Scottish wizard and polymath, and perhaps the greatest scholar to walk the land, Iain McGilchrist, who lives up in the Isle of Skye, pay me a visit, said, metaphor is what links language to life. So it goes a lot deeper than maybe we've been taught. He says, metaphor is what links language to life. Language begins in the world of experience and returns to the world of experience, and it does so via metaphor. The musician, druid, and writer Andy Letcher calls language a crystallization out of song. And in The Spell of the Sensuous, David Abram writes, the coherence of human language is inseparable from the coherence of the surrounding ecology, from the expressive vitality of the more than human terrain. It is the animate earth that speaks. Human speech is but a part of that vast discourse. Our bodies, like other animals, are crystallizations of ancient co-evolutionary processes. You could say we're communions of organisms, not communes of organisms, communions of organisms. Just as our bodies have grown within this planet, this solar system, so too has our language. I think that McKillip had a keen, intuitive sense of this. Terri says that she did not read The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram. I thought she did. She just kind of knew it. And in Odd Magic, which you could kind of interpret as the wild twin of The Spell of the Sensuous, it's a great book. The central character is a gardener called Brendan Vetch. And let's hear a little passage from Odd Magic. Again from Terri. Thanks, Terri.
Talking to one of the strange, silent beings was like trying to converse with a boulder. He knew no words old enough, slow enough, for such an ancient thing to hear, when a single word in its own language might begin in one century and end in another. When he let their minds seep into his, tell him what they chose, they filled him with emanations, images. So Brendan spoke to him in this language, older than words.
Can you feel what she's doing there? She's dissolving language back into the more than human field. If you've not read that book, it won't fully make sense, but I think that's all right. to not fully understand. I did not fully understand the stories when I first read them, and I don't understand alchemy, but I still like it. So if the human body and human speech are remembered as properties of this planet, then alchemy as language begins to make more sense. Language is crystallized into images, into metaphor, and metaphor, as Iain McGilchrist said, is what links language to life. So let's seal this idea into our memories with the help of the word magician Gerard Manley Hopkins, who said something along the lines of, as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rims in roundy wells stones ring. As each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow flown finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Thank you, Gerard Manley Hopkins. It's good to rely on the dead. He was a homosexual priest in the previous centuries who almost burnt all his poetry. He asked his friend to, and his friend did not do it. But as an alchemist of language, McKillip's stories turned the mind-forged manacles into a flock of doves. And like talking did for her, Patricia's word spells knocked down the walls that past centuries have built around imagination. Her stories dissolve those walls. They invite us to go beyond and to keep going. I thought, Patricia McKillip wrote, by immersing myself in the process, that perhaps I could transmute language. In a culture where our ways of speaking often feel as tame and square as the built environments we inhabit, the transmutation of language becomes vital. And you can feel McKillip at work on that project in her books, particularly Alphabet of Thorn, The Bards of Bone Plain, and especially, I think, in Odd Magic. And to lean once again on a book which I really feel like is the sort of spirit twin of Odd Magic, The Spell of the Sensuous. Let's end on a final passage from Terri Windling.
For those of us who care for an earth not encompassed by machines, a world of textures, tastes, and sounds other than those that we have engineered, there can be no question of simply abandoning literacy, of turning away from the written word. Our task, then, is that of taking up the written word with all its potency and patiently, carefully writing language back into the land. Our craft is that of releasing the budded, earthly intelligence of our words, freeing them to respond to the speech of the things themselves, to the green uttering forth of leaves from the spring branches. It is the practice of spinning stories that have the rhythm and lilt of the local soundscape, tales for the tongue, tales that want to be told again and again. Sliding off the digital screen and slipping off the lettered page to inhabit those coastal forests, those desert canyons, those whispering grasslands and valleys and swamps, finding phrases that place us in contact with the trembling neck muscles of a deer holding its antlers high as it swims toward the mainland, or with the ant dragging a scavenged rice grain through the grasses, planting words like seeds under rocks and falling logs, letting language take root once again in the earthen silence of shadow and bone and leaf.
Thank you.